Okay. How many of you already were familiar with the story of David and Bathsheba and Uriah? Okay, we got a good bunch who already know the story well. This particular story is one of the most compelling stories of Scripture, I believe. And the plot could easily be the plot of a modern movie or a modern novel. If I were a political preacher, which as you all know, I'm not really a political preacher, I could use this story and talk about the abuse of power. Because David does what he does because he's the king and he has the power to do it. But I'm not going to talk about that. I could use the story to talk about the easy way that we can fall prey to temptation through the lust of the eyes. But I'm not going to do that either. What I want to talk to you today about is how someone who the Bible describes as a man after God's own heart could hear a story about someone else and be so upset that he said that person should die, and then find out the story's about himself. How could he not know it was about himself? How could he be so blind that he did not realize that he himself was sinning against God? Jesus in the Gospels talks about the problem of hypocrisy. We all know that word, right? Hypocrisy. Say one thing, do another. Tell me what's wrong with me while you're not paying any attention to what's wrong with you. Jesus says in the Gospel, you know, you should take the log out of your own eye before you try to help your neighbor get the speck out of theirs. Or, if we were doing a modern paraphrase, Jesus might simply say, look in the mirror first. What do you need to see about yourself? And what can you change that might change the dynamics of a situation? Instead of noticing what someone else can do. We are like David, all of us. There are things we see happen and we get upset. Why doesn't anyone do something? Are we doing something? How often do we say, what could I do? Instead of, why isn't someone doing something? We have this uncanny ability to walk around unaware of ourselves and how we contribute to the situation that enrages us. In addiction cycles, they call it enabling. You know, you want to help someone overcome an addiction, one of the things you have to do is figure out how you're enabling their behavior and stop. And that's not easy, because we love people. I watched an episode of a show called In Plain Sight. It doesn't matter. The story was about two brothers who grew up without a mother and father. The older brother cared for the younger brother, and the older brother was a playground basketball star in the city. And they got involved with gambling. And they ended up being witnesses against a murder, and they went into the witness protection program. The older brother left his playing career, took a job as a mechanic to provide for his younger brother, to give him a chance. And his younger brother was very talented. And somehow or another, the younger brother got involved in gambling. And it got worse and it got worse. And at one point, he comes to his brother, his older brother, and he says, I need $13,000 or they're going to kill me. And his older brother wants to give it to him. But the U.S. Marshal on the show says, don't give it to him. Number one, they won't kill him, because if they kill him, they get no money. They'll hurt him maybe, but he will never learn if you keep bailing him out. You're enabling his gambling addiction. And so, she didn't say it in these words, but what she was really saying was, don't just look at your brother's problem, look at how you are contributing. As we think about what it means to remove the log from our own eye before we deal with the speck in our neighbor's eye, we should keep in mind what Jesus said, you know? If the blind lead the blind, they both end up in the ditch, right? So if you haven't even got clear enough vision that you can really help with that speck, you're liable to blind them even more in the process. You know what they call that in modern language? Collateral damage. Right? You're trying to do a good thing, but in the process, there's collateral damage. How do we avoid collateral damage in the church, in our relationships? By looking in the mirror. David was rightly outraged when he heard this story. I mean, think about it. A rich man has everything. God has blessed this rich man abundantly, obviously. And because he's not only rich, but he's selfish, when the traveler comes and he wants to do what he's supposed to do, hospitality, right? I mean, in that culture, that is very important. So he wants to have a feast. But instead of slaughtering one of his own flock, he says, oh, well, this man who apparently was under his control has a beautiful little lamb. And the story, you know, for those of you, some of you are, some of you aren't pet owners and lovers like I am, but some of you know exactly what I mean. This little lamb, what's it saying? Was like a daughter to him. You know, any of you know what it's like to love your pet that becomes a member of your family? Yes. It wasn't just a lamb. It wasn't livestock to this man. See, to the rich man, he had lots of livestock. Now, I'm a meat eater. I'm not a vegetarian. And my wife's a meat eater. But she likes to say, I don't like to eat anything I've ever met. She likes her meat to be packaged in a grocery store, you know. If we thought about it, it'd be hard for some of us to eat meat if we really thought about the animals that it comes from, right? Not all of us. Some of us are just cold-hearted, what can I say? But why is it? Let me just give you an example. Why is it that in this culture, and I think in the Indian culture too, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in Western culture, that it's perfectly fine to eat pork or beef or chicken, but don't serve me cat or dog. But if you go to Korea, cat or dog might be on the menu. Right? You see what I mean? Anyway, the lamb was like a precious child to this man. And because he had the power to do it, and he was selfish, the man took that lamb to make the meal, rather than one of his numerous flock. And David was so upset. This man should die! I mean, that's upset. Now, in his second sense, he backs off a little bit. Well, if we don't put him to death, he should at least repay fourfold. See, what David understands is there's no way to replace the lamb that's been taken, because any other lamb's not the same lamb. And then Nathan, and I imagine this maybe almost with this. Nathan looks David straight in the eye and says, David, you are that.